The dog of the African daughter of the Arab executive blocked her path on the wedding day. Then she did. A grand wedding like no other. The venue sparkles with luxury. Golden chandeliers, marble floors, and guests dressed in the most extravagant attire. Everything is set for the perfect ceremony. The daughter of a billionaire Arab executive, a woman of African descent, is about to take the most important step of her life. But as she prepares to walk down the aisle, her dog suddenly blocks her path. Gasps echo through the room. Confusion spreads among the guests. Why is the animal stopping her? Does it sense something no one else can? Then, in a moment that no one saw coming, she does something that leaves everyone in absolute shock. What happens next will change everything. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring more unbelievable stories like this one. Now, let's dive in. The sun bathed the grand estate in golden light as the wedding day of Nia, the African daughter of the billionaire Arab executive Khaled Al Mansour, unfolded like a dream. The private palace, nestled on the outskirts of Dubai, was a vision of elegance. Marble fountains, towering palm trees, and an atmosphere of opulence that only the world's elite could afford. Inside, Nia stood in front of a towering mirror, her wedding dress cascading in layers of silk and lace. Her deep brown skin glowed against the ivory fabric, her hair adorned with golden ornaments passed down through generations. Today, she was to marry Rami, a well-respected businessman her father had approved of, a man with wealth, power, and a flawless reputation. But something in Nia's heart felt off. She should have been excited, thrilled even. Instead, a strange unease sat heavy in her chest. She tried to shake it off as pre-wedding jitters, but her body felt frozen, as if warning her of something unseen. Then, the sound of claws clicking against the polished floor pulled her out of her thoughts. Seyfu, her loyal Rhodesian Ridgeback, had been with her since she was a child. The massive, muscular dog had been a gift from her mother's side of the family, a guardian, a protector, and above all, her best friend. But as she turned to greet him, her heart skipped a beat. Seyfu stood in the doorway, blocking her exit. His stance was firm, eyes locked onto hers with a seriousness she had never seen before. "Seyfu," Nia whispered, stepping toward him. But the dog didn't move. Instead, he let out a low, warning growl, not at her, but at the open door behind her. A shiver ran down her spine. Outside, the wedding planner was already calling for her. The orchestra was playing the prelude. It was time. Nia took a deep breath, preparing to step forward. But the moment she did, Seyfu lunged forward, blocking her with his massive body. Gasps erupted from the corridor as the bridesmaids and attendants witnessed the scene. "Nia, what's happening?" one of them asked, wide-eyed. She didn't have an answer. She only knew one thing. Seyfu had never acted this way before. And deep down, a terrifying thought took root in her mind. What if he was trying to tell her something? Nia's heart pounded as she stared at Seyfu, his massive frame blocking the doorway like an unmovable force. His amber eyes burned with intensity, his ears perked up, his stance unwavering. This wasn't just mischief. This was a warning. Outside, the wedding planner's voice grew sharper. "Miss Nia, we're ready for you. It's time." She could hear the murmur of guests, the distant sound of the orchestra playing softly, waiting for her grand entrance. The weight of expectation pressed down on her chest like an iron hand. But Seyfu didn't move. She tried again, taking a cautious step toward the door. Instantly, the dog bared his teeth, letting out a low growl. A hush fell over the room. One of her bridesmaids, Layla, gasped, "Nia, what's wrong with him?" I don't know." Her father, Khaled al-Mansour, had always been skeptical of her attachment to Seyfu. "A dog has its place," he would say, "but it does not belong in matters of business or family." And yet, Seyfu had never acted this way before. A nervous attendant stepped forward. Should we remove the dog?" Nia hesitated. Something in her gut told her not to. Then, from the hallway, a deep voice cut through the tension. "What is the delay?" It was Rami. Her fiancé's sharp features appeared in the doorway, his tailored white suit pristine, his dark eyes filled with quiet irritation. "We have 300 guests waiting. Are you coming or not?" Seyfu let out another growl, but this time it was directed at Rami. A chilling silence filled the room. Rami's expression darkened. "What the hell is wrong with this dog?" Nia placed a gentle hand on Seyfu's head, feeling his muscles tense under her palm. His body was rigid, his breath deep and steady, as if he was ready for a fight. The wedding planner was already waving to the security guards, standing at the far end of the hallway. "Take the dog out of here." "No!" Nia's voice came out sharper than she expected. The entire room went still. She had never raised her voice like that. Not in front of her father's people, not in a moment as important as this. Rami's jaw clenched. "Nia, this is ridiculous. You're letting a dog ruin our wedding?" But it wasn't about the wedding anymore. Nia crouched down, looking into Seyfu's eyes. "What is it, boy?" she murmured. "Why won't you let me leave?" Seyfu huffed through his nose, shifting his weight slightly. Then his gaze flicked toward the hallway behind Rami. A sinking feeling settled in her stomach. She slowly lifted her head, eyes locking onto Rami's face, and for the first time, she saw it. Something cold, something impatient, something she had ignored for too long. Rami had always been polite, always careful with his words. But now, there was something in the way he looked at her, something wrong. And Seyfu saw it before she did. Her heart hammered. Was this coldness always there? Had she just been too blind to see it? Rami exhaled, his patience clearly wearing thin. He stepped forward, extending a hand. "Nia, stop this nonsense. Come." Seyfu snapped. His bark was sharp, powerful, a warning. Rami flinched, pulling his hand back. Then, just as quickly, his face twisted in anger. "This is insane!" He turned sharply toward the security team. "Get rid of that animal!" Nia felt an instinctive, primal need to protect Seyfu. She stepped in front of him, eyes blazing. "No one touches him." Rami stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You're embarrassing yourself," he muttered. "This is your wedding, your father. I don't care." The words tumbled from her lips before she could stop them. "I trust my dog more than I trust you right now." Gasps filled the room. Layla grabbed her wrist. "Nia, are you sure about this?" No, she wasn't sure of anything. But her gut screamed that Seyfu wasn't just acting out. He was trying to save her. A tense silence stretched between her and Rami. Then his expression shifted. His anger melted away, replaced by something smoother, more controlled. And that scared her even more. Finally, he let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "Fine." He stepped back. "If you want to throw everything away over a dog, Be my guest. Her breath caught in her throat. Everything. The perfect wedding. The perfect marriage. The perfect life that had been planned for her. She had spent her entire existence walking the path that her father had paved for her. But now, for the first time, she was at a crossroads. And Seyfu had placed himself in the middle of it. The orchestra outside continued playing, unaware that inside, Nia Al-Mansur was standing on the precipice of a choice that would change her life forever. The room was suffocating. The weight of hundreds of guests waiting outside, the murmurs of her bridesmaids, and the cold stare of Rami bore down on Nia like a crushing force. Yet the only thing she could focus on was Seyfu, standing firm in front of her, muscles taut, amber eyes locked on Rami with an intensity she couldn't ignore. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. Rami had always been perfect, the charming businessman, respected by her father, admired by the elite. But now, something felt off, too smooth, too controlled, and the way his expression had shifted just moments ago, like a mask slipping back into place, made her stomach twist. She had ignored her instincts before, but Seyfu hadn't, and she couldn't ignore him now. A tense silence stretched between her and Rami. Then finally, he smiled. "You're being emotional," he said, voice smooth as silk. "This is your wedding day, Nia. You're going to throw it all away. Over a dog?" She didn't move. "You know what people will say, don't you?" he continued, stepping closer. "That you're impulsive. That you embarrassed your father. That you—" Seyfu snarled. The deep, guttural sound sent a chill down her spine. Rami froze mid-step, his jaw tightening. His hand curled into a fist for a fraction of a second before he exhaled sharply and plastered a forced chuckle on his face. "Fine," he muttered, shaking his head. "This is ridiculous. I'll be at the altar. When you're done with whatever this is, come find me." Then, without another glance, he turned and walked away. The moment he was gone, Nia felt the air rush back into her lungs. The wedding planner sputtered in disbelief. "Miss Naya, this is completely unacceptable. The guests are waiting. Your father—" "Where is my father?" Nia cut in, suddenly realizing that Khalid al-Mansur had been absent from all of this. Her father had always been precise, calculating, and in control. He wouldn't have let something this important spiral into chaos. And yet, he hadn't stepped in. The wedding planner hesitated. "He's in the study, speaking with Rami's family." A knot of unease tightened in her stomach. She turned back to Seyfu. He was still on high alert, ears perked, chest rising and falling with steady, measured breaths. Something was wrong. Nia knelt beside him, pressing a hand to his warm fur. "You're trying to tell me something, aren't you?" she whispered. Seyfu whined softly, then turned, walking toward the hallway. Nia blinked. Was he leading her somewhere? Layla grabbed her wrist. "Nia, what are you doing?" She met her friend's eyes. "I need to see my father." "This isn't the time." But Nia was already following Seyfu. Something inside her told her that if she walked down that aisle now, if she ignored this moment, she would regret it forever. She moved quickly, her heels clicking against the marble floors as she followed Seyfu down the hall. Her bridesmaids called after her, but she didn't stop. As she approached her father's private study, the door was slightly ajar. Voices murmured inside. Hushed. Tense. She reached for the handle, then froze. Her father's voice was low, firm. "Are you sure she doesn't know?" Rami's father answered. "She suspects nothing." But if she backs out now, we have a problem. Nia's blood turned to ice. Seyfu pressed close to her side, sensing her sudden tension. She peeked through the gap in the door. Inside, her father sat behind his grand mahogany desk, his dark eyes fixed on Rami's father. The air between them was heavy with something unspoken. Rami's father leaned forward. "We had a deal, Khaled." Khaled exhaled slowly. "And you will get what you were promised." The words sent a chill through Nia's entire body. Promised? A deal? What were they talking about? Her breath caught in her throat as Rami stepped forward, his voice laced with irritation. "She's hesitating. The dog got in the way. I told you we should have handled that earlier." Her heart stopped. Handled? What were they going to do to Seyfu? Her pulse pounded in her ears as the realization hit her all at once. This wedding wasn't about love. It was about business. A transaction. A deal between two powerful families. And she was the price. The weight of the truth crushed her. Everything she had believed, everything she had been raised to accept, was a lie. Her father, the man she had trusted more than anyone, had been willing to trade her away like a business asset. Rami had never loved her. He had only ever wanted control. And Seyfu had known. That's why he had blocked her path. That's why he had growled at Rami. He had seen what she refused to see. A lump formed in her throat. She had to get out of here, now. But the moment she turned to leave, the door creaked. The voices inside the study went silent. Then, her father's voice came, cold and sharp. "Nia." She froze in place. Nia's breath hitched. The weight of her father's voice, sharp, knowing, unyielding, sent a shiver through her. Slowly, she turned toward the door. Inside, her father, Khaled al-Mansour, sat behind his grand desk, his expression unreadable. Beside him, Rami's father remained seated, his lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. And standing just a few steps away was Rami, his arms crossed, his dark eyes locked onto hers with something dangerously close to amusement. Nia clenched her fists. The deal. The arrangement. She had overheard everything. Seyfu, standing at her side, let out a low growl, his body tense. Her father's gaze flickered toward the dog, before settling back on her. "What are you doing here?" His voice was calm, but beneath it, she sensed a quiet warning. Nia swallowed. She had two choices: confront him now, or pretend she had heard nothing. For a fleeting moment, she considered the latter. She had spent her entire life obeying her father, doing what was expected of her, keeping the peace. But now, her world had shifted. The truth was in front of her, and she couldn't ignore it. She lifted her chin. "What deal were you talking about?" A beat of silence. Rami's father exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "This is why women should not concern themselves with business matters." Nia's fingers curled. "Business?" she repeated. "Is that what my wedding is? A transaction?" Her father's expression hardened. "Nia, lower your voice." "No," she snapped, stepping forward. "Tell me the truth. Right now." Her father studied her for a long moment. Then, with a quiet sigh, he leaned back in his chair, his hands folding together. "You were never supposed to hear that," he admitted. Something inside her cracked. So it's true, she whispered. You planned this. This wasn't about me or my happiness. It was about, what? Power? Control? Her father's jaw tightened, but Rami was the one who spoke. Nia, don't be naive. Marriages at our level aren't about love. They're about alliances, strengthening families. Your father agreed to this match because it benefits both sides. Her stomach twisted. All the time she had tried to convince herself that Rami was the right choice. All the times she had ignored the quiet doubts in the back of her mind. She had never been given a choice at all. I trusted you, she said, turning to her father. Her voice shook, but she didn't care. I thought... She stopped herself, her chest tightening. I thought you wanted what was best for me. This is what's best for you, he said evenly. You don't see it now, but you will. Nia laughed bitterly. You mean it's what's best for you? Her father's lips pressed into a firm line. Rami sighed. Enough of this. He stepped forward, his presence suddenly overwhelming. You're overreacting. You'll walk down that aisle and everything will be fine. Seifu's growl deepened. Rami's eyes flicked to the dog, his patience thinning. Get rid of that thing. Something inside Nia snapped. She took a step back, instinctively placing a hand on Seifu's back. If you touch him, I swear. Rami let out a quiet laugh. You're really choosing a dog over your own family? No, she said. I'm choosing myself. Silence. Her father's expression darkened. Nia, he said, his voice colder than before. Think very carefully about what you're doing. I have. The words came out steady, certain. She turned on her heel. Rami stepped forward. Nia. But before he could reach her, Seifu lunged. A deep, menacing bark filled the room. Rami stumbled back, his face paling as Seifu bared his teeth, his body tense, protective. Nia didn't wait. With her heart hammering, she grabbed the door handle and ran. Down the hallway, past the stunned bridesmaids, past the confused guests. Everything blurred together. Behind her, she heard her father calling her name, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. She burst through the front doors of the estate, the hot Dubai air hitting her skin like fire. She was still in her wedding dress, still in the shoes that had been chosen for her, still dressed like the perfect bride. But she was not that woman anymore. She had no plan, no destination, no idea what came next. But for the first time in her life, she was free, and Seifu was right beside her. Nia ran. The extravagant wedding gown, with its layers of delicate lace and silk, clung to her as she sprinted across the marble steps of the Al Mansour estate. The golden embroidery shimmered under the Dubai sun, but she felt like she was suffocating inside it. Seifu ran beside her, his powerful legs keeping pace, his eyes scanning the surroundings as if he knew they weren't safe yet. Behind her, she could still hear the chaos erupting inside, her father shouting, the wedding planner panicking, the guests murmuring, and then Rami's voice. NIA! Stop! Something about the way he said it sent a chill down her spine. She pushed herself forward, her breath coming in sharp bursts as she reached the circular driveway. Her family's fleet of luxury cars stood gleaming in the sunlight, Rolls-Royces, Bentleys, Ferraris. But she had no way of leaving. She turned frantically, looking for anything, anyone, who could help her escape. A group of security guards stood near the entrance, watching her carefully. They were her father's men. They wouldn't let her go. Seifu let out a low growl, Her mind raced. She couldn't go back inside. She couldn't stay here. And then she saw it. At the far end of the driveway, an older black Mercedes sat parked near the gate, one of the estate's service cars. The driver, a man in his 50s wearing a grey uniform, was scrolling through his phone, unaware of the storm unraveling behind him. It was her only chance. She grabbed the heavy layers of her gown and ran. The moment she moved, the security guards reacted. "Miss Nia!" one of them called, stepping toward her. "Where are you going?" She ignored them. "Miss, please, let's go back inside." Seyfu barked, loud and sharp. The guards hesitated. Even in their expensive suits and trained composure, they knew better than to challenge an animal of Seyfu's size and power. That hesitation was all she needed. She reached the Mercedes, yanking the door handle, locked. She turned to the driver, who had just noticed her presence. His eyes widened in shock as he took in the sight of her, a bride, breathless, desperate, and clearly running from something. "Miss, open the door." Her voice was urgent, pleading. "Please." The man hesitated for only a second before reaching over and unlocking it. She threw herself into the passenger seat. Seyfu jumped in right after her. "Drive," she gasped. The driver glanced at the approaching guards. "Miss Nia, your father—" "I don't care. Drive. Now!" There was something in her voice, raw, desperate, unshakable. The driver hesitated no longer. He turned the key, the engine roared to life, and the car peeled away from the estate. The chase. The tires screeched against the hot pavement as they sped down the private road leading away from the mansion. Nia's pulse pounded in her ears. She turned in her seat just in time to see Rami storming out of the estate, his eyes burning with fury. And then he ran toward one of the luxury SUVs. A security guard handed him keys. Another car started. He was coming after her. "Faster!" she urged the driver. He shot her a nervous glance. "Miss, where do you want to go?" "Anywhere but here." The city loomed ahead, the glittering skyline of Dubai, a stark contrast to the suffocating world she had just left behind. Her breathing was ragged, her hands trembling in her lap. Her mind reeled. What had she just done? What had she walked away from? A marriage, a future, a life she had been raised to accept, a prison she hadn't realized she was in, until now. Seyfu nudged her hand gently, his warmth grounding her. She looked at him, eyes stinging. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered. He gazed up at her, his amber eyes steady. He had been trying to protect her all along. The car raced down the highway, the estate shrinking in the distance. But then, headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. The black SUV was closing in. Her breath hitched. Rami wasn't letting her go. The headlights grew closer, their blinding glare reflecting in the rearview mirror. The black SUV swerved through traffic, moving with a precision that sent a chill through Nia's spine. Rami was chasing her. "Faster!" she urged, gripping the edge of her seat. The driver hesitated for a fraction of a second before pressing his foot down on the accelerator. The Mercedes roared forward, weaving through the late-night Dubai traffic. Neon lights and towering skyscrapers blurred past, but all Nia could focus on was the relentless vehicle behind them. Seyfu's body was tense, his head shifting between Nia and the back window, sensing the danger that loomed closer. A low growl rumbled from deep within his chest. The SUV was gaining. Nia turned to the driver, her voice urgent. "Take the side streets." The driver's hands tightened on the wheel as he made a sharp right, veering off the main highway and onto a narrow road between high-rise buildings. The Mercedes bounced slightly as it hit a rough patch of pavement, the tires skidding before regaining traction. For a brief moment, she thought they had lost them. But then, the SUV appeared again, barreling down the street like a predator closing in on its prey. Her pulse pounded. This isn't just a chase, she realized out loud. He's trying to trap me. Rami knew these streets better than she did. He knew where they were headed. Her father's power stretched far beyond the estate. He owned businesses, security forces, even parts of the police force. If Rami caught her, if her father got to her first, she would never be able to escape again. Nia turned to the driver. Do you know anyone? Anywhere safe? He hesitated, as if debating whether he should be helping her at all. Then he sighed. I know a place. Hold on. He veered sharply to the left, entering a narrow alleyway barely wide enough for the car. The SUV behind them skidded, trying to follow, but the space was too tight. For the first time, they had the advantage. Nia exhaled a shaky breath. Keep going. The driver maneuvered through the winding back streets, taking turns so fast that Nia had to grip the dashboard to steady herself. Seifu braced against her legs, his body warm and reassuring. Then, suddenly, the car burst out onto an open road. Ahead of them was the Dubai Marina, the glittering waterfront lined with yachts and luxury residences. The city sparkled like a dream, but to Nia, it was still a cage. The driver pulled into a secluded parking lot near a private dock. He cut the engine, breathing heavily. We need to get out of sight. Nia's hands trembled as she pushed the door open. Her wedding dress was torn and dirty, her hair loose from its pins. She didn't care. She turned toward the ocean. The water stretched endlessly, dark and mysterious. A few boats rocked gently in their slips. And then she had an idea. A boat. Rami had control over land, but he wouldn't expect her to leave by sea. She turned to the driver. Can you help me get on one of those boats? His eyes widened. Miss, that's... I'll pay you, she said quickly. I don't care how much. I just need to go. Seifu let out a small bark, as if approving the plan. The driver hesitated, then nodded. Come. I know someone. They moved quickly toward the dock, the sound of the ocean filling Nia's ears. She had no idea where she was going. She only knew one thing. She would rather face the unknown than live in a cage. And for the first time in her life, she felt free. The salty breeze hit Nia's face as she stepped onto the wooden dock, her torn wedding dress trailing behind her. The driver led her quickly past a row of yachts, each one more extravagant than the last. The marina was quiet, the city lights reflecting on the dark waters like scattered diamonds. Her heart pounded. Every second counted. Seifu stayed close, his amber eyes darting around, sensing the tension in the air. The driver stopped near a modest white motorboat, smaller than the luxury yachts around it, but sturdy enough for a quick escape. A man in his 50s stood by the railing, cigarette dangling from his lips, his sun-weathered skin and sharp eyes giving away years of experience on the water. This is Youssef, the driver said. He's an old friend. Youssef looked her up and down, taking in the wedding gown, the desperation in her eyes, the massive dog by her side. He let out a slow exhale. I don't want trouble, he muttered. You won't have any, Nia said quickly. I just need to get out of here. Youssef sighed, rubbing his temple. Where are you going? Anywhere but here. The driver handed Youssef a thick envelope. She's good for it. Youssef took the money, then flicked his cigarette into the water. Get on. Nia didn't hesitate. She climbed aboard, Seifu jumping in right after her. The engine hummed softly as Yusef untied the ropes and pushed away from the dock. The boat drifted onto the open water, leaving the marina behind. Nia exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The further they got from the city, the quieter it became. The skyline faded in the distance, replaced by nothing but the vast, endless ocean. For the first time, she wasn't running towards something expected of her. She was running towards something unknown, and for the first time in her life. She wasn't afraid. The hum of the motorboat was the only sound cutting through the quiet night. The water stretched infinitely ahead, dark and mysterious, swallowing the city lights behind them. Nia sat near the railing, her wedding gown torn and stained, her bare feet cold against the deck. But she didn't care. Seyfu lay beside her, his body warm against her legs, his ears still alert, as if waiting for another threat to emerge from the darkness. Yusef steered the boat with practiced ease, his eyes scanning the horizon. He hadn't asked any more questions, but Nia could feel his curiosity burning beneath his silence. Finally, he spoke. "You gonna tell me what you're running from?" Nia hesitated, staring at the rippling water. She had spent her entire life controlled, expected, and silenced. Her father had dictated every step she took. Her engagement had been decided for her. Even her own thoughts had never been fully hers. But now, she had nothing left to lose. She looked up at Yusef, her voice steady for the first time. "I was supposed to marry a man who sees me as an asset," she said. "A deal between two families. A business contract disguised as love." Yusef let out a quiet chuckle. "That happens more than you think." She shook her head. "Not to me, not anymore." The boat hit a small wave, making her grip the railing tighter. "How far are we going?" she asked. "As far as you need," Yusef replied. "But the real question is, what's next?" The question unraveled something inside her. What was next? For the first time in her life, there was no script to follow, no father controlling her, no fiancé watching her every move, no predetermined path, just her, Seyfu, and the open sea. She took a deep breath, letting the ocean air fill her lungs, and then she smiled, because for the first time, she was free.